Hey there, and welcome to the mission briefing First Contact. If you're new here on this channel, hi, I'm Maya, and if you're returning, you know the drill. This is usually the place where I break down the latest Star Trek episode with some fresh eyes, honest reactions, and honestly, zero pretense. Now, this week I'll be jumping into StrangeNewWorlds Season 3 Episode 1, which is the follow-up to the last season's Gorn cliffhanger, titled Hegemony Part 2. Now, brief explanation. Yes, I'm doing this about 20 days after the premiere in US, but since I'm watching with Sky Showtime, Central Europe got the show on August 4th. So there's going to be more than 2 week delay. Now, before we go any further, if you enjoy this series, make sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you're listening. It really does help the channel grow and keeps the warp core running. So, how did this one land? Well, it's complicated, so let's dig in. We pick up immediately after the Season 2 finale. The Gorn have attacked, colonists have been taken, and Enterprise is looking seriously outnumbered. And I mean seriously outnumbered. Outnumbered so much that it kind of feels that it should have been blown out of the sky, but we'll tackle that one later on. Now, Starfleet gives the order to pull out. Admiral April tells Pike to regroup with the fleet. But of course, Pike finds a semantic loophole and decides to try saving his people first. The episode kind of splits into 4 major threads. Well, it's 3 major threads and like a mini thread. First one is, of course, the Pike and the bridge crew are coordinating the rescue. We have Chapel and Spock trying to save Captain Battelle from a Gorn infection. We have our away team, meaning La'an, Ortega, Mabenga, and Sam Kirk, stuck on the Gorn ship. And we have like I said, a mini thread or a separate arc with Pelia and Scotty trying to engineer their way out of this mess. It is ambitious, it does move fast, and honestly sometimes it moves a little bit too fast. But overall, it holds together honestly better than I expected. The plot is kind of really dense, so here's the short version of the plot. Pike wants to tag a Gorn ship to track the away team. Mitchell figures out how to do it. The bridge crew works together to make it happen. And yes, it is really nice to see a true team effort. Something we don't usually get to see in new Trek. I'm going to exclude the animation from this conversation. Meanwhile, Chapel and Spock are trying to save Battelle, who's been infected with some Gorn hatchlings. Of course she is. Their solution is to use Una's Illyrian plasma to boost her immune system and dissolve the Gorn, basically fighting alien parasites with some genetic soup. Let's put it that way. Over on the Gorn ship, the away team is trying to escape a grotesque digestive chamber that also doubles as a power plant for the Gorn and also a morgue. I mean, you can't blame the Gorn. If nothing else, they seem to be highly efficient. They eventually find those transporter codes, and once they get out of the Gorn ship, they were able to transmit them to the Enterprise, so the Enterprise beams out all the colonists and eventually beams them out too. And somewhere in all of those storylines, we have Pelia and Scotty, who tried to manipulate stellar activity to mimic, as far as I understood, a solar flare, and that is going to trigger the Gorn's hibernation cycle? Question mark? I'm not quite sure how that works out, but okay. Let's start with actually what worked, because some things genuinely did work. The whole Pike's opening moment really hit the right tone, in my opinion. He's visibly shaken by the attack, which kind of makes sense. Like, you don't see that kind of devastation and just shake it off. But he doesn't freeze, which is important. You see the shock, you see the confusion, but then the training, the experience kicks in, right? He pivots, he trusts his crew and gets to work. That's kind of a layered leadership I like to see in Trek. Look, leaders are not folks who just make decisions. They're the folks who, in situations like that, when they are genuinely rattled, can pull it together, can rely on those around them to get ideas, suggestions, commentary, you might say, but then make a decision on what to do, right? It's really good layered approach to leadership. It's not me tell you do this, right? It's kind of not the way it is. Now, speaking of the crew, this was, a first time in a very long time where it felt like the entire bridge team was actually functioning as a team. Mitchell is a character we've been seeing since, I think, season 1. She never had anything major to do in an episode, and in this one, especially at the beginning, she literally gives a very meaningful contribution. And it's interesting how, with just a couple of lines, including the character that we have seen all along, makes suddenly the world seem real and lived in, as if Starfleet is not just 5 people on a bridge and everybody else is a moron. It's actually comprised by the smartest and most excellent of what Earth and the Federation can offer. And you see that in the scene because, Una starts it off with figuring out that we need to tag the Gorn ship before they leave so we can follow them. We don't have a chance staying right here at this moment where we have like a gajillion Gorn ships firing at the Enterprise. So she starts it off. You have Mitchell, who figures out that we could use a dummy torpedo. You have Spock, who figured out what we need to put in that dummy torpedo in order for us to be able to track this Gorn ship. And finally, Uhura figures out how we're going to actually deliver that torpedo to the Gorn ship. So everybody was literally a piece of the puzzle, right? And everybody brings a piece of the solution. And it really reminded me why the ensemble casts in Trek are so powerful. It's not just one hero, it's actually a collective. Not the Borg one. I mean, the Federation one, right? Let's move on to another thing that worked. Pelia and Scotty dynamic. For me, instant gold. Pelia kind of pushes, Scotty resists, and we watch that spark of brilliance begin to take shape. You can already see the legend Scotty will become. But this version of him is still raw, still grieving and uncertain. And I love that they're letting him grow in a role instead of kind of skipping ahead. On the other side, you have Pelia as this kind of unorthodox mentor. But she is. Every one of their interactions is her pushing Scotty in places where he's not comfortable. because she knows he will rise up to the occasion. So it's a very fun and interesting dynamic. And honestly, both of them have such an amazing chemistry and such a great, comedic timing that they really play good on that line between, transition between, just a comedic moment and then having something really heartfelt. And it's amazing. I would also like to give credit to the scene between Admiral April and Pike. Again, it's very rare in modern Trek that an admiral isn't either, corrupt, clueless, villainous, or just a moron. But here, both of them have very strong points. April on one side understands that his job is to protect billions of lives across the Federation space. Pike, on the other hand, doesn't want to abandon innocent lives. Now, their tension really feels real and respectful, and that scene really carried some weight. It's always, I think Star Trek is always greatest when it's not preaching, but showing two sides of a coin. That's really when Star Trek hits really, really well. Chapel scenes were also solid. She's first, of course, scared, rattled, indecisive, but she turns it around. Now, I still don't love the way they have written her dynamic with Spock, but I'll talk about more of that soon. But on her own, she is a force, and I like this representation of Chapel. And finally, yes, Ortega's finally got a line that wasn't just a comic relief. I'm Ortega's, I fly the ship. It's a small win, but it's a really welcome win for me. Now, what did miss the target? Well, that's not sugar-coated. The Gorn problem is still a problem and will always be a problem in Strange New Worlds, and it's a big one, right? Look, they've gone from menacing to ridiculous. Between the spore-style reproduction, the energy-feeding digestive pods, and the over-the-top monster behavior, it feels like someone dumped Alien, Mass Effect, Matrix, and Predator into a blender and then called it a Gorn. And look, none of this is subtle. It's really try-hard. Like a fan film with too many references and not enough grounding. Now, these aliens aren't aliens anymore. They're kind of a cosplay of all the tropes. And every time we cut to the away team, I was literally rolling my eyes and groaning. Not because the characters weren't compelling, but because the setting was so absurd. It really undercut everything. The second I saw Matrix pods, I was like, really? So now look, I can find a good thing about this. Apparently those digestive chambers are part morgues, part prisons, part energy fueling stations. Like, if nothing else, Gorn are super efficient. Maybe I should have put that in the what worked list. Anyways, look, Lan's trauma, Ortega's injury, the mission to escape. Look, there was a real emotional material to work with there, but it kind of all got buried on the piles of sci-fi excesses. Let's put it that way. And while we're here, we really do need to talk about Illyrian plasma. Using Una's modified DNA to save Batel might work in the moment, but it really completely undermines one of the most important rules in Star Trek canon: the Federation's absolute ban on any genetic modification. Look, DS9 made this very clear. It wasn't a gray area, it was a hard line. That rule still exists hundreds of years later, and here, it's kind of brushed off as, off the books, quiet, rule breaking. Again, the whole trial with Una was framed as the exception, not the norm. But the more Strange New Worlds leans into using her plasma as a cheat code, the more they erode that narrative. It's kind of frustrating because it's not just a detail, it's really a major ethical pillar in the Trek universe, and it's being treated like an optional plot device. Don't get me wrong, I don't have any problems with writers of Star Trek re-examining that issue and maybe re-examining the almost bigoted nature in which Starfleet decided to push this rule on all the member worlds because of the Earth trauma with eugenics wars, right? It can be really interesting re-examination of that policy. You can actually see maybe captains fighting against it, maybe some of the Federation member worlds fighting against it. So it could be interesting re-examination of that storyline. But the problem is you set the rules, and it's kind of weird when you set the rule and then like 1 or 2 seasons later you don't follow it. It does really feel like a cheat code. Unless there is something significant coming later on. Right now, it just seems like a very simple cheat code. Also, Spock. The writing for him has pulled back a little bit in this episode from the overly emotional mess of season 2. Thank God for that. But his dynamic with Chapel, it still feels wrong. Their goodbye was weak. It really had no gravity. It's not earned. If they're trying to steer toward the TOS's version of Chapel loving him while he remains distant, it really needs better handling. Right now, it feels like a weird tonal leftover. And finally, Ortega's. Like I said, that line was great, but her character still feels like a blank slate. After 2 seasons, we should know more than she's snarky and she flies. Give her something. Anything at this point. Now, when it comes to the canon, there are a few things worth noting here. First, Dr. Roger Corby got a mention from Chapel. She said something along the lines that she's leaving for 3 months to study with him, which is a major callback to the original series, where Corby is her fiance, and then turns out to be, let's just put it that he doesn't get a nice ending in that episode, and it's kind of weird episode when you think about it. Just watch the episode, you'll get what I'm saying. That line is subtle, and for the longtime fans, it's, if you know, you know. We also get some canon tie with Una's Illyrian biology again, and more lore about the Gorn hibernation cycles, triggered by stellar flares. That last one feels like a deliberate way to explain why we will never see the Gorn again. Well, at least for a decade or so. It's a soft retcon, maybe even a course correction. And if that's what they're doing, good. Shut the door and let's move on. So, my first impressions of this episode, it was a messy episode. It wasn't terrible. It was definitely uneven in some parts. There were moments that worked really well, like Pike, the bridge, teamwork, Pelia and Scotty, Chapel, under pressure, but the Gorn plot continues to drag the show down into literal B-movie territory. It's loud, it's overcomplicated, and it's visually cluttered. The references to other franchises aren't clever, they're distracting. It feels like they're trying way too hard to be edgy sci-fi when they should just trust the strength of their characters and the world. It's Star Trek. I get the sense that the writers know it too. There's a feeling in this episode that they're trying to wrap up the Gorn mess and move forward. Like I said, if that's the case, good. Don't bring them back. Let this be the end of the Gorn in Strange New Worlds and New Trek for a very, very long time. So, that's it for this episode of Mission Briefing First Contact. If you enjoyed this review, make sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you're tuning in. It really helps boost the signal. So, until next time, Captains, stay curious like you, honorable like a Klingon, logical like the Vulcan, and never stop looking at the stars. Because we're Trekkies, and that's what we do. Live long and prosper.